Hello and welcome to this month's painting tutorial. I'm Sharon Gray and I'm going to take you through a watercolor painting focusing on a seascape. Now the first thing I want to talk about in this month's tutorial is finding the best composition from your reference material. I'm going to do that by using some pieces of just plain white paper and making myself a little box. I don't want to crop it somewhere where it's going to be divided in two and the horizon line is in the middle. What I do want is for the eye to move all around the piece. So I like something like this, except that I have a lot of dead sky. Let's see if I can crop that sky in a little bit. Right there looks pretty good. Once you have your photo reference cropped the way that you want it to be, then go to your watercolor paper and you can see this is a square and this is a rectangle. They need to be similarly proportioned or else I'm not going to wind up with a picture that I want. So I'm going to draw myself a little line here. Doesn't have to be exact, but I want to be working square to square. And then I'm going to use a piece of willow charcoal and quickly sketch the largest shapes of the composition. Start with your horizon line, which in this case is pretty far up top. Then I'm going to develop the major shapes of the composition. So here is this grassy triangle. Then right above that I have my first big rock shape. Below that is my second big rock shape. And then this wave crashing on the beach. Right there. Then here's that first dark rock shape, and here's the second one just a little bit ahead of it. Then what I like to do after I have it sketched out in these really bold lines is I like to go back and clean it up a little bit more carefully. So I'll go and erase the lines that are going to interfere with watercolor, but here I can straighten up the bottom of the rock edge and just be a little bit more careful in my shapes. Just like this. Then we're going to start painting. Remember, in watercolors, you paint from the back forward, larger shapes to the smaller shapes, but you also have to keep in mind that you have to preserve your whites. So before you start to paint, look for little shapes that are light against darker backgrounds or that are going to be hard to preserve otherwise. For instance, these white flowers on the hill. And the best, easiest way to put them in is going to be to preserve them with masking fluid. So I'm going to get a little bit of masking fluid and I'm going to paint those little flowers and their stems carefully where I want them to go. And I'm just going to put in a few dots, and those are going to be my yellow flowers, and maybe a line or two for some stray weeds on the hill. Now that has to dry before I can paint over it, but I can start back to front and begin by painting this sky. Get a large flat wet, and since it's so small I'm just going to paint it on dry brush like this. To move the color down though, I'm going to dip my brush in the water, and when I stroke down I get a natural gradation from the light to dark. And then for moving down into the water more, I'm going to change my color to a little bit more green-gray. Maybe a little purple right at the back. If you get bleeds that you don't want before your paint dries, you can go back with a damp brush and slice right over the top of them to get rid of that blooming color. And then just fill in some color like this. So here I'm just using several shades of blue and working around the rocks. Now if you're not liking the way that your water looks, take a paper towel before it dries and just wipe away what you've got. Then when this is completely dry, we'll come back and I'll try that water a second time. This sky is nice and dry now and ready to do some more work on the ocean. I'm going to use a syringe. This is a blunt-tipped syringe. I'm going to fill it up with some colors and spray them on the page. I'm not going to worry too much about the rocks because those are dark. I'm just going to shoot some of this color right over the top. Shoot it back and forth like this. I'm going to do the same thing with my Payne's Gray. Then I can just remove this masking paper and play with the color by shifting the board back and forth and blowing it. And let those waves sort of paint themselves. Then in the background, I wanted that to be a little bit more purple, and I still do. So now I'll get my flat and just drop that right up next to the tape. Then I'll use a really muted version of that same color and just do a sloppy little shoreline here. But I don't want to lose that white broken edge of the wave, so I'm going to blot that back out. And then there's nothing to do but to let it dry, and we'll come back to it and see how it turned out. Here's what the dried water looks like so far. I'll take off the tape, and right away I can see that I do need to clean up that edge a little bit. That paint is still nice and fresh, so it's going to be easy to lift up, although you might need to blot it dry so that it won't bleed. That's up to you. But the thing to do next is to get those large dark rock shapes in and see how that affects the wave patterns. So I'm going to get a small round, and I can still see a slight outline where that rock needs to go. So I'll just freehand it. Here's that larger rock. That's good. And then we have this last rock shape in the background. There. But then I can use a larger round and start to paint on the sand. So I want the sand to be nice and smooth, so I'm going to use a water masking technique. Water masking is simply painting in water. So you paint everything that you want that sand color to be with clean water first, and in that way you'll be controlling where the paint goes. Now I just have to mix up a sand color and then use that large brush and get that sand painted. Very good. Now what I can do before that has a chance to get very dry, I'll darken up this area with a little bit more brown, and then I'm going to let it dry for just a little bit, and then I'm going to spritz it with some water, just like this. And see those puckers coming out in the sand now? That's a good texture for sand because it's naturally going to be really dimpled. Okay, so now what I have to do is let this dry completely, and then I'll come back and we'll push down. Now the base tone of the beach is dry, so let's brush in some base color on these rocks. I'm using some ochre and some brown. And remember, you never want to just paint one color. Let 2 or 3 mix on the page. And whenever possible, put the color down and let it mix itself so you're not over painting everything. Then I'll do similar work on this rock. Got some ochre here. And I'll use a flat on the edge like this and just drop in a few darks that might read as shadows. Very nice. In this cut across of land here, I'm just going to quickly use a damp brush and establish some broken texture. Then I'm going to paint that red dirt, mix in some darker browns. And then I have green grass that's also growing there. So I'm going to mix up a green and drop in some green patches here and there. Down here at the base is a lot of grass. Here I'll just use some straight yellow, drop that in as well. And then I'm going to spritz the page just a bit, help those colors move. And I'll use the back of my brush and pull out some of those really minute little grass shapes at the edge of the cliff. I'm just adding some shadows in the patches of grass. So let's let this foreground and middle ground dry, and then we can work some more on the water and details in the sand. With the foreground elements dry here, we're ready to do some detail work. And I'm going to work a little bit on everything in the page. Let's begin by adding some more detail to the rock. So I use a small round, get some dark on the brush, and I'm just going to hold it at the edge and just roll some texture like this. Do more on the foreground rock than you do back here because this one's farther in the distance. The driftwood is going to have a shadow side and then a highlight edge at top. And then you see the dark pockets in the sand. I'm just going to use my small round, and since there aren't very many of them, I'll just paint them in like this. And then if you need to, just go back a second time and add some darker shadows here and there. And then I'll use a nice wet wash and drag over the surface in the background to darken up a large patch of the sand here a little bit more, make it retreat and lay down. I'll rub off the masking fluid in the foreground here, and then I can use a bright yellow on my round brush and just stipple in some of those little bright flowers. Since they are protected and they're white right now, the yellow should show up really well against the green and brown. And then for the white flowers, those sort of fluffy ones, I'm going to reshape them with some aqua cover. Remember, aqua cover isn't exactly paint, it's more like whiteout, but it's tinted to match perfectly the white of your paper. So here I am just sort of redefining the edges of these puffy ones. And then I can go in with a rigger brush, which is one of those super skinny ones, and I could add the little stems. Boink. The point of using a rigger brush is that you should be able to get those stems down in one short stroke. If you need to practice on another sheet of paper, then do that, but try not to go back in and go over it multiple times. I'll also use the rigger to darken up the shadow on this driftwood, and I can use it to get into some of the crevices in the rock if I want to add a little bit of extra detail. Then I'm also going to use my aqua cover to clean up my waves. But you have to be really, really careful because you don't want it to look like you painted everything. You just have to add a touch of white. But I need some waves crashing around these rocks, and I'm completing these shapes that got separated, kind of putting them together so that they look more like a solid mass of foam instead of all of these weird broken shapes that don't look like anything. You can see how that's already improving the wave quality here. Back here this looks cool, but it's too much white. So I'm going to go back with some of that teal blue and just do a gentle wash over the top. And to keep that from looking strange, I'm going to have to bring that color out in some other places as well. Looking at the picture, this rock is kind of fading into the background of the sand, so I might want to bring out that edge a little bit more using some dark color. And if you need to, you can wash that into the rest of the rock a little bit more so it's not such a line. And I'll do the same thing on the back rock. So I'm going to do a few little finicky details like that. It won't take long. And then I'll come back to you one last time and I'll show you the finished painting. Here's the photo reference that we started with, and after a little bit more detail, here is the painting that I finished with. So I'm going to remove this tape. There we go. There's that nice clean edge. Then you can pan up and see the sky, and that's our seashore painting. The next step that I would recommend for you is to download the file and paint this scene yourself. It's going to be good practice for learning wet on wet techniques in the foreground, then learning how to add detail to them later, and some freer, looser washes in the background where you're trying to preserve the crashing wave while still maintaining a really interesting mixture of colors in the water behind the wave. If your first attempt doesn't turn out, then I would definitely recommend going back into it and trying a second and even third time. So that concludes this month's painting tutorial, and I hope that you've learned something you can take back with you to your own studio. As usual, thank you so much for watching.